"Don't touch that door, Isaac." Detective Claire Navarro's voice cracked like a whip through the empty motel corridor. The air smelled of mildew and something darker, something metallic that seemed to cling to the peeling wallpaper. Officer Isaac Boone froze, his hand inches from the rusted handle, his chest rising with the kind of shallow breaths only fear allows. At his feet, Shadow the K9, whose restless energy had dragged them all, here was trembling with low growls that rumbled deep in his chest. His paws scratched against the grimy carpet, eyes fixed on the door as if it contained every nightmare he had ever known. It had begun as a simple patrol through the outskirts of Cold Creek, a town no one had cared to remember. The motel stood like a skeleton at the highway's edge, long abandoned, its broken neon sign flickering the word stay in a cruel irony. Shadow hadn't led them here on accident. He had torn free of his handler's gentle pull, ears pinned back, nose pushing into the night until they reached this forgotten place. It wasn't unusual for a canine to follow a scent. But there was something relentless in Shadow's pursuit, a desperation that made Claire's stomach twist with unease. Boone whispered, "Why is he so obsessed with this room? Its empty place has been condemned for years." He tried to sound steady, but his voice betrayed him. Claire shook her head. "Dogs don't obsess, Isaac, they know." She crouched, letting her fingers hover near Shadow's quivering frame without touching him, afraid of breaking whatever fragile thread of instinct held him taut. "Something's behind there," she murmured, "and it isn't good." The silence of the motel pressed against them. Far down the hallway, the wind rattled broken glass, but here, near room 6, the air was heavy, as though even the night refused to breathe. Shadow barked suddenly, sharp and feral, the sound ricocheting off the hollow walls. Boone jumped back, his hand on his holster, but Claire held firm. She pushed the door handle slowly, the rust grinding like teeth. The door creaked open an inch, and then the smell hit them rat. Chemical despair rolled into one suffocating wave. Shadow lunged forward, pawing at the gap, whining in a way Claire had never heard before, a sound raw and pleading. Inside, the dim light from the hall spilled across a room frozen in time, mattresses torn open, cigarette burns pockmarking the carpet, and along the far wall, symbols carved deep into the plaster. They weren't graffiti, these were deliberate, etched with precision, lines that spiraled and knotted like something ancient. Boone muttered, "What the hell?" His voice died as the flashlight beam caught a table in the center of the room. Scattered across it were children's shoes, each pair neatly placed, each impossibly small. Claire's throat tightened. She had walked into crime scenes more times than she could count by these weapons, the echoes of violence, but this was different. The shoes told stories without voices, and Shadow seemed to know. He pressed his nose against them, whimpering, pacing in frantic circles as if searching for the children who had once worn them. Claire gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. "This isn't random," she whispered. "Someone left this for us to find." Boone swallowed, hard, his flashlight shaking. "Why here? Why now?" His question carried the weight of dread, because they both knew Cold Creek had been the site of disappearances, rumors whispered in diners, names scribbled on missing posters that never came down. The motel was more than abandoned. It was a tomb of secrets. Claire's radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that made Shadow bark again. A voice broke through dispatch, urgent, almost frantic. "Detective Navarro, do you copy? We have reports. Multiple families across 3 counties are calling in. Kids missing. Same time frame, same signs." The dispatcher's breath caught. "Navarro." One caller mentioned a motel, a deserted one. The blood drained from Boone's face. "It's starting again," he said, his words trembling. But Claire knew this wasn't just starting. It had been happening, quietly, in the shadows, threaded together like the carvings on the wall. Shadow barked once more, his voice carrying a terrible clarity, as though he was trying to tell them, "This isn't just a room. This is the beginning." Claire steadied herself, her heart pounding. The shoes, the symbols, the sudden surge of missing children. It wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate, orchestrated. The motel was no longer just a place where the forgotten rotted away. It was the epicenter of something that reached beyond Cold Creek. Her hand tightened on the radio. "Tell them," she said, her voice low but firm. "Tell everyone. This isn't local anymore. It's national." As the words left her mouth, the wind outside roared through the shattered windows, rattling the doors up and down the hallway, like applause from the unseen. Boone shivered, and Shadow pressed against Claire's leg, his body shaking but his eyes fixed on the darkness inside the room. She didn't push him away. She needed his strength, just as much as he needed hers. And in that desolate motel, surrounded by silence and the ghostly remnants of lost children, Claire understood the truth. What they had uncovered wasn't just evidence, it was a warning. Something vast and merciless had been waiting for its moment. Tonight, with the dog's instincts dragging it into the light. That moment had come. The nationwide alert hadn't been triggered yet, but Claire knew it would. And when it did, the country would tremble, because the shadows lurking behind that, the door, weren't just Cold Creek's burden anymore. They belonged to everyone. The radio went dead as quickly as it had crackled to life. leaving only the hum of silence pressing down on Claire and Boone. The words of the dispatcher still rang in Claire's mind like an alarm bell that refused to be silenced. Missing children, multiple families. The timing wasn't random, not with this discovery. Shadow paced in restless arcs, his nails scraping the floor, his body tense as if he were the only one who fully understood the danger bleeding from these walls. Claire forced herself to breathe through the sour stench of rot. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice strained but steady, "we can't touch anything else. Bag it, photograph it, lock this whole place down." But even as she said it, her instincts screamed that they weren't safe. This wasn't just a crime scene frozen in the past. Something about the way the shoes had been arranged, too neat, too deliberate, felt like a message meant for tonight. Boone snapped pictures with trembling hands, the flash bouncing against the walls and illuminating the carved symbols like flickers of lightning. With each burst, Claire saw more detailed spirals nested within spirals, circles broken in exact patterns, runes she couldn't decipher but felt in her bones. They weren't just scratches and plaster, they were ritual. Shadow barked again, louder, this time jerking his body toward the corner where the wall sagged into shadow. Claire swung her flashlight in that direction and froze. There was another table, smaller, half hidden under a torn sheet. The beam of light revealed jars lined in a row. Boone stepped closer, and his stomach lurched audibly when the light caught what was inside. Dolls, hand-stitched, each with button eyes but torn mouths sewn shut with thick black thread. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. These weren't toys, they were effigies marked with the same symbols carved into the walls. Each doll wore a tag name scrawled in uneven ink. She leaned forward, reading the first tag, Marcy, age 7. Her blood chilled. These weren't just symbols of fear, they were records. "Claire," Boone's voice was breaking now, his usual bravado shredded to pieces. "We're standing in the middle of something bigger than us. We shouldn't even be here." His words trembled, but Claire couldn't turn away. She reached out with a gloved hand, lifting one of the dolls carefully. Its stiff cloth body seemed to resist her touch, as though it had been waiting, watching. Shadow's growl deepened into a roar that filled the room, pulling her back to herself. She set the doll down, every hair on her arms prickling. The radio on her belt came alive again, this time with a voice that wasn't dispatched, was distorted, thick with static. But the words came through with haunting clarity. "You shouldn't have come." Boone staggered back, his eyes wide, as if the motel itself had spoken. Claire pressed the receiver. "Identify yourself. This is Detective Navarro." Static answered, then silence. Boone shook his head, whispering, "They're watching us." Shadow bolted suddenly, his paws hammering against the floor as he lunged toward the bathroom door at the back of the room. He scratched wildly, his teeth bared, his barking echoing like thunder. Claire rushed forward, Boone close behind, and together they forced the swollen wood open. The smell that poured out was heavier, more suffocating, and Claire's eyes stung. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, grainy black and white prints taped side by side, hundreds of them forming a patchwork of faces. Children, every one of them, staring blankly at the camera. Some photos were old, curling at the edges, but others were recent, their color sharp, their details fresh. Boone staggered backward until he hit the wall. How long has this been going on?" His question dissolved into the reek of chemicals, the buzzing light overhead, the unspoken horror breathing through those photographs. Claire traced one with her finger, her chest tightening when she realized the background in several pictures was the same motel room they now stood in. The children had been brought here. Shadow whimpered, pressing his head against her thigh, as if trying to shield her from the truth. Her phone buzzed sharply, pulling her out of the haze. A text notification lit the screen, but the number was blocked. Just 3 words glowed in the darkness. "Check underfloor." Her heart thudded. Boone leaned over her shoulder, reading it aloud in disbelief. "Someone's guiding us." Claire's mind raced. Was it a warning, or a trap? Either way, the pull was undeniable. She knelt down, sweeping the flashlight across the floorboards, until she saw its scratches running parallel to the planks, as though something had been pried open countless times. She motioned Boone over, and together they dragged aside the mildewed carpet, exposing a hatch. The wood was cold under her gloves, but it lifted with a groan, revealing a set of stairs plunging into darkness. Shadow barked down into the void, his voice fierce and determined, as if demanding they face what waited below. Claire gripped the railing, her pulse hammering in her ears. "We don't have a choice," she said, though her throat tightened around the words. Boone's flashlight trembled as he pointed it downward. The beam caught the edges of what looked like metal cages, stacked and waiting. In that moment, Claire realized the motel wasn't a relic of the past, it was still alive. Whatever was happening to those children wasn't over. It was unfolding here, beneath their feet, and they had just torn the lid off something the entire nation would soon be forced to see. The motel's hallway felt narrower now, as though the walls themselves had crept inward with every step. Claire and Boone took. Shadow padded ahead, nose close to the stained carpet, tail stiff, his body language betraying an unease Claire had never seen before. Boone muttered something under his breath about leaving, but Claire silenced him with a look. There was no leaving now, not after what they had found in that first room. The children's shoes, the carved symbols, the smell that clung to their clothes like rot. Those things had opened a door in more ways than one, and there was no closing it. Shadow suddenly halted, ears pricked forward. His gaze locked on a door at the far end of the corridor, its number plate missing, the wood splintered by age. He growled low, not the sharp warning bark from before, but a guttural sound that resonated deep inside the silence. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, yet every part of her training told her to follow. She nodded at Boone, and together they edged forward, the beam of his flashlight trembling across the doorframe. When Claire pushed the door open, it resisted like something inside was holding it shut. A sharp shove broke it loose, and the door swung inward with a groan that echoed unnaturally long. The room was almost empty except for a single chair facing the wall. On the wall itself, more carvings stretched upward, not just symbols this time but crude figures, stick-like drawings of children holding hands. Lines etched so hard into the plaster that dust still hung in the air. Claire's throat caught as the light revealed something else. Fresh fingerprints smudged across the carvings, small ones, as though a child's hand had touched them not long ago. Boone swore under his breath and stepped back. This can't be recent. This place has been boarded for years. His voice was thin, but Claire wasn't listening. She was staring at the chair. Its seat was stained, and around its legs were scratch marks, deep grooves that told of something or down. Struggling, Shadow barked once, sharp and desperate, then pressed his nose hard to the floor, following an invisible trail that led straight toward the closet. Claire motioned Boone to cover her as she pulled the closet door open. At first, only darkness greeted them. Then, from the corner, came the faint sound of breathing. Boone lifted his gun, his hands shaking, but Claire stepped closer and then she saw them. Two wide eyes, reflecting the flashlight beam. A boy, no older than 8, crouched inside with his knees pulled to his chest, his face pale and streaked with dirt. His lips trembled as if forming words he was too weak to say. Claire's heart lurched. She dropped to her knees, lowering her voice to a whisper. "It's okay, you're safe now. We're here." Shadow wind crawling halfway into the closet as if to comfort the child himself. The boy's gaze flicked to the dog, then back to Claire, and slowly he reached out a trembling hand. Boone swallowed audibly behind her, his gun lowering as the reality of what they had uncovered settled in. But relief was short. The boy's small voice, fragile and cracked, rasped a single word that froze Claire's blood. "More." He pointed to the wall, to the childlike figures carved into plaster, and whispered again. "More." His meaning was clear. He wasn't the only one. The air seemed to collapse in the room. Boone staggered back, his face ashen. "Jesus, Claire, if there are more." His words trailed off, but the silence said enough. Claire pressed the boy gently into her arms, feeling the brittle bones beneath his shirt, and her mind reeled. Whoever had used this motel hadn't been hiding one child. They had been hiding many daughters. They hurried the boy into the hallway. Shadow barked again, this time toward the staircase leading down to the basement. Claire and Boone exchanged a glance heavy with dread. The boy clung to her tightly, his heartbeat fluttering against her chest like a trapped bird. Boone's voice broke, the silence, hoarse and shaking. "Claire, we don't have backup. If there's something down there." Claire tightened her jaw. "We don't get to turn away. Not now. Not with him here. Not with the others still missing." She handed the boy gently to Boone. "Stay with him. Whatever's downstairs, Shadow and I will find it." Boone tried to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. The descent was suffocating. Each step creaked under her boots as the smell grew stronger, a stench of damp earth and chemicals. Shadow moved low to the ground, his growls echoing in the narrow stairwell. The basement door was slightly ajar, and from beyond it came the faint hum of something electrical. Claire's hand trembled as she pushed it open, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. What she saw inside wasn't just evidence. It was something that would unravel everything she thought she knew about this case. A dozen small beds lined the walls, their sheets filthy but recent, the air thick with the lingering presence of children, and above them, strung from wires, were cameras, all pointed downward. The red recording lights still blinked. Claire staggered back, bile rising in her throat. Shadow barked furiously, his voice filling the basement like a desperate alarm. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't gone. They had been watching, recording, cataloging, and if the cameras were still live, then someone, somewhere, was watching them right now. The realization was the twist of a knife. This wasn't just an old crime resurfacing. It was happening now, and it was bigger than they could have imagined. And for the first time that night, Claire felt true fear, not of what they had already uncovered, but of what was still to come. The storm outside pressed against the deserted motel as if nature itself wanted to smother the secrets within. Detective Claire Navarro's pulse drummed in her ears while Shadow paced the room, nose pressed to the floorboards, pawing at a loose panel near the far wall. Boone shifted uneasily, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Claire, this doesn't feel right. Dogs don't scratch at wood for no reason." His voice cracked, but Claire stayed silent, watching Shadow with a sinking weight in her chest. The dog whined, then barked, sharp and desperate, his nails tearing until the splintered panel came loose with a sickening snap. Beneath it lay a narrow crawl space, the stench pouring out like a poisoned breath. Boone gagged and pulled back, covering his mouth with the crook of his arm, but Claire dropped to her knees, her flashlight piercing the darkness below. For a long, aching moment, the beam danced across rubble and debris. Then it landed on something that froze her blood. Photographs, dozens of them, each one pinned against the dirt wall with rusted nails, edges curling from dampness. Children's faces stared back, some smiling, some blank, all of them gone. Shadow growled low, pressing his muzzle into Claire's shoulder as if to anchor her. Boone whispered, "These are the kids, aren't they? The ones they said never came home." His words hovered in the stale air like a verdict. Claire swallowed hard, her throat raw. "Yes," she answered, though it came out more like a confession. Her mind spun, flashes of old case files and unanswered questions slamming together into a single horrifying pattern. Whoever had lived here hadn't just taken children, they had memorialized them, trapped their innocence in these walls as if feeding off the memory. Before Boone could reply, the radio crackled again. Dispatch's voice was frantic, words tumbling over one another. "Navarro, we have confirmation. Multiple states alerts matching your discovery. The motel isn't an isolated site. It's a network. Whoever's behind this has been using locations like this across the country." Boone staggered back, nearly dropping his flashlight. His face was pale, sweat beading on his brow. "A network? My God, how many are there?" Claire steadied herself, her hand instinctively brushing Shadow's collar. The dog's steady breathing gave her something real to hold on to amidst the chaos. "Enough," she said, her tone hardening with grim resolve. "Enough that this isn't just a Cold Creek problem anymore. This is a nationwide threat." She stood, squaring her shoulders, though the weight of what they'd uncovered pressed down like stone. Boone's fear was raw, but beneath it she saw something else rage, the kind that comes when innocence is shattered too many times. Shadow barked once more, pawing at the photos, his body trembling with urgency. Claire lifted one picture carefully, her hands shaking. It was a little girl with braids, no older than 8, smiling wide as if the world had not yet betrayed her. Claire felt her chest tighten until breathing was a battle. She lowered her head, whispering so softly only Shadow could hear, "We'll bring them justice." The motel seemed to shudder in agreement, its walls groaning as the storm raged harder outside. Boone wiped his face, muttering, "If this is just one site, then God help us when the others are found." His words lingered in the air, not as doubt, but as prophecy. Claire turned toward the door, clutching the photo like a vow. The story was no longer about a forgotten town or a single crime scene. It had grown into something monstrous, sprawling, alive across state lines, and in that terrible revelation, as Shadow pressed against her side, Claire realized the true horror. This was only the beginning. The night had grown impossibly still by the time Claire stepped back into the motel's corridor. The photographs weighed heavy in her hand, edges damp from the crawl space. The girl's smiling face pressed against her palm as though asking not to be forgotten. Boone lingered at the doorway, his expression hollow, but it was Shadow who broke the silence, pressing forward with a steady, unflinching gaze. His breathing was calm now, his earlier frenzy replaced by the solemn certainty of a creature who had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Outside, the storm had weakened into a drizzle, raindrops tracing lines down the motel's shattered windows. The radio buzzed with updates, every word confirming that what they had uncovered here was already unraveling across the country. More sights, more children, more questions that no one wanted answers to, but answers that could no longer be avoided. Claire listened, but said nothing, her eyes fixed on the photograph, her mind circling the vow she had whispered in the darkness. She thought of the parents whose lives had been carved into silence, of nights spent staring at empty bedrooms. She thought of every child who never came home and of the cruel precision of those symbols carved into the motel walls. The evil they had unearthed was vast, but it was not untouchable. It had left its traces, and Shadow had pulled them into the light. That truth was enough to begin. Boone finally spoke, his voice raw. "We can't fix what's been done." Claire turned toward him, her face pale but resolute. "No," she said quietly. "But we can stop what's coming." Shadow barked once, sharp and certain as though sealing the promise as dawn broke. Faintly over Cold Creek, the motel stood like a ruin, a scar on the landscape, but within its crumbling walls, a truth had been pulled into daylight. Claire tucked the photograph carefully into her coat, not as evidence but as a reminder. When she walked away with Shadow at her side, the air was lighter, though the weight in her chest remained. Some stories are too dark to erase, but they can be faced, and in that facing, in the courage of one dog's instinct and the persistence of those who listen, light can reach even the deepest shadows.